This is my fourth attempt. I don't know what in the world is going on with this. So, okay. Wednesday the 6th. This is my fourth attempt. I started this at about 10 to 12. It's now 12:15. But anyway, so anyway, I want to talk about the integumentary system, and I know we talked about it in class briefly, but remember this is an organ system. It literally is your largest organ system. We'll get into some of the roles or the functions of your skin or integumentary system coming up soon. You know, as far as healing and as far as the acid mantle and some of the salt in the skin is really part of your first line of defense. And I was talking to all of you in class and saying that, you know, what I'm looking at is really dead. So you're all, and I said literally, you're dead to me when I'm looking at you, because your hair, your skin, nails and everything is literally dead. The only part that I said was sort of alive was your cornea, and that once again was avascular, which means it doesn't have any blood supply, and it gets oxygen through air and nutrients through your tears. And we'll talk about that again. I'm sure I'll bring it up again. So I kind of want to get into your skin, hair, your nails, your sweat glands, and sebaceous or oil glands, which are part of your, you know, your acid mantle of your skin, which once again is part of your first line of defense. All right. So structure of your skin, we have the epidermis. Remember, epi means on or above. That's the superficial region. And we talked day one about superficial to deep. And it doesn't even matter if you're in an anatomical position. Superficial to deep is depending on your direction of impact or direction of orientation, is still going to be the first surface you come across. So it consists of epithelial tissue and is avascular. Okay, remember I said that your skin is dead. So even when you're sleeping and you're moving around, and we talked about dust in your house, and that's literally dead skin. So the first superficial layer of your skin is avascular, it's dead. And we talked about the basal membrane, how these keratinocytes are adult cells, go from deep to superficial, and as they go from deep to superficial, they get rid of their cytoplasm and they become more and more keratinized protein. And I said, just kind of, if you want to picture them as just pillows or whatever, and their goal really is for armor, protection, keep water and things out. So it consists of epithelial tissue and is avascular, a meaning none or not vascular. Dermis underlies the epidermis, mostly fibrous connective tissue, and that is vascular. And you know, if we want to talk about leather or hide, sort of is really what we're you know, we're talking about, if we want to think about it like that. Hypo means under, low, depending on how it's used. This is a superficial fascia, and we'll talk about fascia later, and how that attaches all of your tissues throughout your body. So it's subcutaneous, under the cutaneous layer, deep in the skin, not part of the skin, but shares some of its functions, mostly adipose tissue that absorbs shock and insulates. And we talked about that in lecture last week. I was talking about, you know, the elderly, how their adipose tissue kind of not atrophies, but they don't really have any. Their skin is very, very thin. They bruise easy, they bleed easy. And you know, I mentioned if you go into a nursing home or an elderly care convalescent home, you'll see them in July or August, and you know, we're dying. It's 85 or 90 degrees, and they're in sweaters, cold. They don't have any insulation. And I said the adipose tissue is there for insulation. It's also part of your bubble wrap, and we'll get into the brown fat for, you know, for energy and things like that as we go throughout the semester. So this anchors your skin to underlying structures, mostly muscles, and we talked last week about the difference between tendons and ligaments, and how tendons were attaching muscle to bone, through the Sharpie's fibers, and you know, how ligaments were attaching bone to bone, and once the ligaments were stretched out, once you sprain or once you sprain a ligament, it generally doesn't have the elastic recall it had. So the joint or the area is not as structurally sound as it used to be. I guess it's really dusty here, something kicked in. I'm dying here. So there's a picture of your scanner or model. All right. Sorry, I brought a model in, but it's not working. So just realize this is superficial to deep, and we'll go over all of these structures, Pacinian corpuscles, erector pili muscles, which when you're cold or you're startled, these can contract, causing the hair on your arm or leg or wherever to stand up. These are your sebaceous glands here. You know, when it brings oil, and you know, if we're talking about your scalp, all right. So you know, let's just say you don't wash your hair for 2 weeks. All right, all that oil is going to be coating your hair, which you want initially, but we're coating your scalp and areas like that. And we'll talk about your dendritic cells of Langerhans, and how they are in your tissue, and they really are part of the immune system. They're antigen presenting cells. They're going to be presenting antigens to your immune system so that we hopefully can build antibodies to it, and then we can have the CD4 cells regulate the T cells. And when they see these MHC1 antigenic markers on their cells that they perceive as foreign, they will go in and attack that. And I said last week that these cells will literally attach, dock on, they'll perforate, they'll poke holes in it, and they'll eject or inject into them enzymes for degradation and destroying. Okay, so your epidermis consists mostly of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. We talked 2 weeks ago about stratified, meaning layered, squamous, meaning those flat cells. And when you're thinking about keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium, so it's layered, it's mostly just protein, it's avascular, so it's really going to be there for protection, to resist abrasion to underlying deep tissue. There's 4 cell types found in the epidermis. So keratinocytes, so keratin, we talked about that being the protein, and I said I want you to kind of picture that as dried gelatin, more or less in sight, meaning adult cells or cells in general that are completely grown and differentiated. So they produce fibrous keratin, protein that gives skin its protective property. These are the major cells of the epidermis, tightly connected by desmosomes. And in class, I talked about how we want those cells to be interlaced and attached really, really quickly, especially like in the digestive system. We don't want anything to be able to breach in between the cells and breach lower, and we certainly don't want anything getting into the basement membrane and then below that into the capillary bed and cause anything systemic. So millions of these are sloughed off every day, and once again I mentioned dust and house dust in your house, and how it's sloughing off, which is normal. It's a major constituent of dust. And then I asked you guys if you ever vacuumed your mattress. So if you haven't, I suggest you try it. Empty your vacuum cleaner bag or container, and then vacuum your mattress and see what you come up with. All right, interesting. So melanocytes, again, these are adult cells. These are spider-shaped cells located in the deepest epidermis. These produce pigment or melanin, all right, which is packaged into melanosomes. Usually a some, S-O-M-E, is going to be a vacuole. So think of it as like a bubble or a container. Melanosomes are transferred to keratinocytes where they protect nucleus from UV damage. So when you're going out in the sun and you're getting a tan or whatever, your skin will darken through these cells, and their goal really is to protect the nucleus of the superficial cells from the UV damage, because UV will start ejecting electrons and start causing damage to the DNA. And we all know, or should know, or will know that your DNA is protected inside your nucleus, and it has all your genetic information. And when your cell wants to produce protein or something, it'll splice that DNA and transfer it to RNA, and then we have introns and extrons and things like that. And we'll decide what we want to leave the nucleus to the cytoplasm and be coded into proteins through the ribosomes and those codons and the nucleotides. All right. Dendritic cells or cells of Langerhans. All right, so these are really key cells in the immune system. So these are star-shaped macrophages, and I said before, macro means big, phage means appetite, eaters that patrol deep epidermis, and they're really just patrolling it, coming across anything that they deem as foreign. These cells will have PAMPs, which is pathogen-associated molecular pattern detectors on there. So they're going to just see, they may not know exactly what it is, they'll know it's foreign, they're going to attach to it, engulf it, digest it, and present that antigenic particle or fragment to your immune system for acknowledgement with your CD4 cells. They'll acknowledge it's foreign, and then we'll get into the antibody and B cells, plasma cells, antibodies, and then the T cells, T8, natural killer cells, and the T8 cells. And then we have tactile or Merkel cells, sensory receptors that sense touch. And there's Purkinje and corpuscles, which deal with pressure. And then I mentioned in class, remember that all of these cells, or any of these sensory portions of your skin, whether they're for temperature, pressure, or fine touch, if a cell can sense cold or heat, or if it can sense cold, it can't be a receptor for heat. If it can be a receptor for pressure, it can't tell temperature. So each one of these, as we learn them or see them, are going to be specific for a certain thing. So, think about that. If the cell is for deep pressure, it's going to be located deeper, or not as superficial. It's going to be deeper in the surface. If it's going to be for light touch, you might start thinking, well, where would that be located? It might be more superficial. Remember, form follows function. Okay, so here are the actual layers of the epidermis. Epidermis is made up of 4 or 5 distinct layers. Now, one of these layers is going to be the lucium. Like if you're talking about lucid dream or something lucid, is very, very clear. So that's the layer that isn't always present, only in thick skin. So these are generally, hope I get this right, but they're going to be generally on the palm of your hand, the sole of your foot. So anywhere that has a lot of erosion or a lot of use, or, friction or abrasion. So thick skin contains 5 layers and are found in high abrasion areas, hands and feet. Thin skin contains only 4 strata. All right, so I said in class, remember, I said there's the apical surface and the basal surface. Apical surface is the most superficial, basal is the deepest. So stratum basal is going to stratum basal is going to be that deeper layer. Next is going to be spinal granulosum. And when you look at the layers, you can see as they grow from deep to, as they, I don't want to say grow, as they evolve from deep to superficial, they start losing their form and function, and they become, you'll see they're spinous or pointed, and they become granular. Ostidium is, remember, it means clear, and the corneum is usually the most superficial layer. Stratum basal layer, deepest of all epidermal layers, layer that is firmly attached to the dermis. This is really the anchoring portion. All right, and just think about that. In more primitive times, or even now, if you were in a fight or a contact sport or anything, you wouldn't want your skin tearing off. You want it attached to something. It consists of a single row of stem cells that actively divide, and we talked about mitosis, producing two daughter cells each time. And I said, your skin literally grows from the basement membrane upward. This is the area of regeneration. And remember I said that your cells have polarity. They have an apical end and a basal end. And if there's a disruption of the polarity, your body knows that that area is dead or damaged. It will start regenerating it. And remember, from deep to superficially, your skin grows from deep towards the center, and as it moves towards the center, it becomes less and less alive. One daughter cell journey from basal layer to surface, taking 25 to 45 days to reach the surface. So that live cell divides through mitotic division. There's two daughter cells, and that takes their migration, takes anywhere from a month to a month and a half, roughly. Other daughter cells remain in the stratum basal as a stem cell. So stem cells are going to be alive, highly active, and generally a stem cell, for right now, we'll consider that a stem cell as something that is plural pertinent. So that means it can produce more than one type of cell. We'll just go with that for right now. Layer, also known as the stratum germinatum, because of its active mitosis. So germ cells, or germinating. You can think of seeds or whatever, germination, new growth. And 25% of the layer also composed of melanocytes, and we want that. Remember, we want the melanocytes there to protect those stem cells. We want to protect that stem cell nucleus from DNA damage from UV. And you'll see later on, or I'm sure you've seen, people that have had basal cell carcinoma or things like that. Basal cell, right? Basal, right here, cell carcinoma. So they have a lot of UV damage, or they're out in the sun, they're not wearing sunscreen, damaging that DNA in the nucleus. So and the damage can cause some cancerous tissue. All right. I'm going to just run and grab my charger, so hang on. All right, so this is going to be your deepest layer, basal. All right, remember I said we have apical surface, basal surface, basement membrane. So start equating all that to deep. Remember, below the stratum basal is that going to be that capillary layer, which is capillary bed, which is going to feed these cells for their mitotic division. Stratum spinosum, or prickly layer. So you can just, when you see pictures of this coming up, just realize it's the shapes. It's going to be the next layer that's superficial to basal, several cell layers thick. Cells contain web-like system of intermediate pre-keratin fibers. So remember, the apical surface is keratin, keratinized protein, neurocytes. So these are they're starting to evolve or change. Filaments attached to desmosomes, and desmosomes, I said, were the rivets, or the things that were holding these cells together very, very tightly, so nothing can breach that surface. So think of it like you see the Last Kingdom, or any of these medieval things. They Roman soldiers, they all worked together, making that super dense wall so that nothing could breach through it. Front line holding everything back. Allows them to resist tension and pulling, so they're very, very attached. Keratinocytes in this layer appear spiky, so they are called prickle cells. Or spiniosum. Scattered among keratinocytes are abundant melanosomes and dendritic cells. Melanosomes are going to produce that melanin, protect the stem cells below it, and dendritic cells, once again, these are part of the immune system, and think of those as antigen-presenting cells. Antigen or antigenic particles, or anything that's foreign, these cells are going to consume them, digest them, they literally process them, and through exocytosis, they display them on their MHC2 markers, right? So think of MHC2 as two hands. They're presenting it to the outside surface. They're going to present it to your immune system. Your immune system's going to agree that it's foreign, right? And they're going to have some kind of immune response to that, hopefully, if you're healthy. All right. This is a complete disaster. All right. Stratum granulosum, or granular, 4 to 6 cells thick, but cells are flattened, so layers thin. So realize these are starting to change shape, right? They're going to become more and more flat because they're losing part of their cytoplasm, and they're pre-keratin, so they're changing their constituents of the cytoplasm. Cell appearance changes, cells flatten, nuclei and organelles disintegrate. So once again, if they don't have a nucleus and organelle, we have said before that your red blood cells eject their nucleus. So anything that doesn't have a nucleus can't reproduce. And we know that they're reproducing from the basal layer anyway with the stem cells. So these just start losing their nucleus or organelles. They really start losing their function. They can't regenerate. So this is where the actual keratination begins. So the layer below this, once again, was pre-keratination. This is where that protein pillow or protein pocket starts. Cells accumulate hyaline granules. So we'll talk about hyaline cartilage and hyaluronic acid, which is a precursor for cartilage. Right. Cells also accumulate lamellar granules, a water-resistant glycolipid that slows water loss. Glyco, remember, is sugar, lipid is fat, and we all know that lipids and water, they don't mix. They have different charges, right? So this is, they start getting that glycolipid, slows down water loss. So we don't lose water from deep in the surface. We want to keep that moisture in, right, through evolution. And we also really don't want water from the outside coming in. Cells above this layer die too far from dermal capillaries to survive. So they're going to go, these are superficial. Remember, the basal layer is way down here, and as you can see my arrow, as the cells, stem cells produce their daughter cells, they migrate forward. Remember, it takes 25 to 45 days. They get to the surface where they're dead, and they're stratified squamous epithelium, and their goal, or their role, really is just protection. Stratum luteum, remember, lucid, clear, found only in thick skin, consists of thin, translucent band of 2 or 3 rows of clear, flat, dead keratinocytes. Lies superficial to the stratum granulosum, so this is the layer above, and this is usually not seen in every, unless I got this wrong, not seen in every single layer. Stratum corneum or horny layer is usually the most superficial, 20 to 30 rows of flat, anucleated, keratinized dead cells. So this is your most superficial layer. This is what you're looking at when you're looking at your Instagram or looking at people. You're looking at their corneum, stratum corneum layer. Counts for 3/4 of the epidermal thickness. And these are they're dead cells, still function. They protect deep cells from the environment, prevent water loss, protect from abrasion and penetration, and really they act as a barrier against biological, chemical, and physical assault. So that's your skin. It's really your first line of defense. And it's all dead. Hopefully the actual external layer, as long as you don't breach deep and hit the basal layer where the capillaries are, it's usually not that painful. Cells change by going through apoptosis. So this is controlled cell death. Right? So your cells should die when they're no longer needed or if they're defective. And this is really where a lot of your dander or dust comes from. Humans can shed 50,000 cells every minute. All right, once again, everyone, back in your mattress. So it's really just showing you here. If you look, stratum basal is the most deep. This is where your blood supply is going to be. This is where your stem cells are going to start. And then as they go from here, up, remember that journey takes about 25 to 45 days. Right. The dermis. I swear to God, I'm doing this. It's just dermis is strong, flexible connective tissue. Cells include fibroblasts. All right, so those are going to remember, we talked about fibroblasts being the extracellular matrix. Macrophages is going to be your big eaters, occasionally mast cells and white blood cells. Mast cells are the cousins of your basal cells. They're usually there for allergic reactions, and these mast cells are really anchored in your tissue, as we just see here. They're dermal. All right, so they're the same as a basophil, more or less, except basophils are in your blood, mast cells are in your tissue. Usually this is tissue exposed to the outer environment. Fibers in the matrix bind the body together, and the dermis makes up the hide that is used to make leather, as I mentioned before. Contains nerve, blood vessels, and lymphatic vessels. So this is deeper. This, if it's damaged, is painful. This is where the blood vessels are. And lymphatic vessels. We talked about the extracellular matrix, and this is where the lymphatic system will bring tissues or anything that's breached the epidermis to the lymph nodes, and then hopefully we can expose those antigenic particles or antigens to B cells or naive B cells, and they'll produce antibodies to it, and then we'll start a healthy immune response. It contains epidermal hair follicles, oil glands, and sweat glands. There's two layers, the papillary and reticular. So one's going to be superficial, one's going to be more deep. So once again, there's your epidermis. This is your dermis here, deeper. You see these ridges here? This is where they really attach rigidly. So the papillary dermis is the areolar connective tissue, and I said before, your areolar connective tissue, when you see this, when you do your dissection, is going to be very, very wispy. It's sort of like tissue paper, but you'll see all this. All right, and the papillary, these have papillary ridges, sort of like your fingerprints. Right? Reticular dermis is dense, irregular connective tissue. It's going to be much, much deeper. And this is your dermal papillae. This is really sort of the makeup of your fingerprints. And remember, your fingerprints are very, very unique. The only one that could have similar or identical would be an identical twin. So papillary layer is a superficial layer of areolar connective tissue consisting of loose interlacing collagen. Remember we said collagen last week was there for strength and durability, and elastic fibers and blood vessels. You want durability, you want a little bit of elasticity there because we want to have a little bit of give and take so we're not tearing or ripping things apart. And then your blood vessels for nutrients. But remember, we don't want anything foreign from the outside. So sorry. We don't want anything from the outside getting in. So loose fibers allow phagocytes to patrol for microorganisms. And those are your phagocytes are the macrophages, and these are going to be your dendritic cells specifically. And they're going to be just patrolling, looking. They have PAMP markers. Remember, I said pathogenic associated molecular patterns. So they may not know exactly what it is, but certain eukaryotic cells and certain bacteria species and genus have patterns that are similar. So dermal papillae are superficial regions of the dermis that send finger-like projections up into the epidermis, and we saw those loops. They were all looped like that. Projections contain capillary loops, free nerve endings, and touch receptors. So these are going to be a little bit more superficial. All right. Tactile corpuscles, also called Meissner corpuscles. And we'll learn, or we'll talk about what each one of these different specific cell types does. They all have a very specific function. In thick skin, dermal papillae lay on top of dermal ridges. Dermal, just think of the dermis, which is under the epidermis. Right? So just think about the hide, or it's not quite to the basal layer, it's somewhere in the middle. Epidermis, dermis, and then basal. If you want to memorize just the three different types. It gives the epidermis these ridges. Collective ridges are called friction ridges. They enhance gripping ability, contribute to sense of touch. Sweat pores and ridges leave unique fingerprint pattern. All right, so just think about that. So if you have your fingerprints, or you have your fingerprints, a little bit of moisture usually. So if you think about it, it helps you grip things. If a little bit of moisture you can grip, if you're trying to sort through paper or you're trying to grip something, you want a little bit of moisture. You want those little ridges for contact. You don't want it super smooth, you slip right off of it. Contributes to the sense of touch. Then we get into the nervous system, we'll realize that your sense of touch, and we'll talk about the homunculus and afferent fibers, and we'll realize that there's certain parts of your body that are very specific or sensitive to touch. There's going to be a lot more nerve endings there, and there's going to be a bigger area in your brain associated with that, proportionate to the amount of sensitivity of that area. So there's your fingerprints, just showing you. All right, the reticular layer makes up 80% of the dermal thickness. That's the majority of that dermal thickness, or that hide area, if you want to think of it that way. Consists of coarse, dense, fibrous connective tissue. Many elastic fibers provide stretch recoil properties. So we want this to be durable. We want it to be flexible. And think about that. If you could, if you want to press your fingers together and release, you realize that if you want to snap your fingers or whatever, you want that pressure, but you want it to be able to have some mobility. Collagen fibers provide strength and resiliency. They bind water, keeping skin hydrated. Cutaneous plexus. So cutaneous or subcutaneous. Cutaneous usually means superficial. All right. Cutaneous plexus, network of blood vessels between the reticular layer and the hypodermis. Hypo means under. Extracellular matrix contains pockets of adipose tissue. When you want that really there for a little bit of bubble wrap, and you want it for a little bit of insulation. The adipose tissue in this area is really generally not going to be for energy ever. Now, cleavage lines run in reticular layers are caused by many collagen fibers running parallel to the skin surface. All right. And you'll see this. I think there's a picture of it, but a lot of the new surgeons, or specifically plastic surgeons, they figured out these cleavage lines. So when they do surgery, they try to run with these lines. So when they heal, the scars are much less noticeable. So cleavage line represents separations between underlying collagen fibers. Now, don't mix these up with dermatomes. Or we'll talk about dermatomes later. Those are areas in your body which are specifically innervated by very, very specific nerve roots coming off your spine. So we'll talk later about if you there's pure patches in your body where you can. If someone doesn't have sensory perception in certain specific areas of the body, we know that there's something wrong with that nerve root coming off of the dorsal root ganglion. We'll talk about that later. All right, flexure lines are reticular layers of dermis folds at or near joints. Right? So these dermis is tightly secured to deeper structures. Skin's inability to slide easily from joint movement causes deep creases. And you'll see these, and your book will show you, visible on hands, wrists, soles, and toes. And, these are really, really visible, and they actually get more visible as we get older. All right. So there's some right there, flexure lines. We want these. We're not going to get into palm reading or what these mean genetically. So extreme stretching of skin can cause dermal tears, or it literally starts tearing that dermis or the hide underneath the epidermis, leaving silvery white scars called striae, also known as stretch marks. Right, and you'll see this in someone who is gravid or pregnant, especially if they've had more than one child, or you'll see it with people that were extremely overweight. They can lose all that weight. They'll have these stretch marks, and then sometimes the skin never goes back. So they literally have to have that surgically removed and stitched up. Acute short-term traumas to the skin are called blisters, fluid-filled pockets that separate epidermal and dermal layers. And this is just there from a burn, so it's burn or abrasion. So fluid or inflammation, so fluid leaves the capillary bed and migrates there for that. Okay. Skin color, there's 3 pigments contribute to skin color. Melanin, I'm sure, hopefully we've all heard of this. Only pigment made in skin, made by melanocytes. I forgot who said it a couple years ago. People that were melanin challenged was actually a very derogatory comment, but made from amino acid tyrosine and tyrosase. Remember this. So ACE is usually an enzyme. Packaging melanosomes that are sent to shield the DNA of keratinocytes from damage from UV. So just like I said, for the 4th or 5th time, the melanin is there with exposure to sun. It'll release the pigmentation. And it's really there to protect the DNA of those stem cells, that reproduce the daughter cells that migrate towards the apical surface. So there's reddish yellow and brownish black. Skin color difference is due to the amount and form of melanin. All right, that's literally the only difference between everyone superficially or phenotype wise. It really is just a matter of melanin. So, we all have to realize we're all humans, we're all having the human experience, and the only really difference is the phenotype, just our physical expression. Right? Freckles and pigmented moles are local accumulations of melanin. That's all they really are. Doesn't mean anything more than that. All right. Excessive sun exposure damages your skin. Just a quick side note here. If you're wearing sunscreen to protect you from the sun and sun damage, that's fine. But please realize the majority of the suntan products out there are carcinogens. They're cancer causing. So if you're going to wear sunscreen, find a company that doesn't have carcinogens in their products. Like Melaleuca is the only one that I know of, or the only one that, yeah, Melaleuca is the name of the company. It's pricey, but if you're going to wear sunscreen, it doesn't cause cancer. So just a side note. Elastic fibers clump, causing skin to become leathery. All right, and I'm sure you've seen that. I used to work with a woman, who literally looked like a suitcase I found in my attic that was 100 years old. Well, you'll see this in some of the elderly population in Florida, or some of the on the stereotype, but you'll see people that spend a lot of time golfing, or people that spend a lot of time on the water, things like that. Can depress immune system and cause alterations in DNA that lead to skin cancer. UV light destroys folic acid. Folic acid is vitamin B9, necessary for DNA synthesis. So insufficient folic acid is especially dangerous for developing embryos. So that's why women in childbearing years need to take folic acid or vitamin B9, because in the embryo, the neural tube is the first thing to develop. And if you don't have folic acid, you can't produce DNA. You won't be able to synthesize and regenerate, especially the beginning, from conception on. The mitotic division is ridiculously fast. All right, so you really need folic acid there present. So photosensitivity is increased reaction to the sun. Some drugs, antibiotics, and antihistamines and perfume causes photosensitivity, leading to skin rashes. Some people will be out in the sun and they'll have completely burnt skin, and they'll say, I don't understand. I was only out in the sun for 20 minutes, whatever. But then, you have to ask them, did you take any antibiotics, any histamines, any specific different lotion, any type of perfume or bug spray or anything else you might have put on there can alter that. Keratin, yellow to orange pigment, most obvious in the palms and soles, or accumulates in the stratum cornea and hypodermis. And this can be converted to vitamin A for vision and epidermal health. And you'll see this, and I've seen it twice in my life. Someone who is not usually, well, these two people happen to be vegetarians, but their favorite thing to snack on was carrots. And as I saw this person, saw them as a patient for a few months, and they kept getting oranger and oranger, and I was like, what's going on here? Turns out they had so many carrots, it's unbelievable. They actually started to turn orange, right? And they won't believe you until they see a picture of themselves. They'll say, oh, I never realized that. All right, hemoglobin. Pinkish hue of fair skin is due to lower levels of melanin. So you can just see through the skin. Skin of Caucasians is more transparent, so color of hemoglobin shows through. So if you want to talk about people being blue bloods, or that's one theory. The other theory is the royal family is all Rh negative bloodline, so they're blue bloods. We won't get into the Rh bloodline, of course. Down the scope, and anyway, alterations in skin color can indicate disease. So if we're going into healthcare, as a doctor or a nurse, or any role you have in healthcare, you'll have, subjective is what your patient tells you, objective, there's objective signs. So all of us, if we're looking at the same patient, we should be able to chart something a patient presents with. All Cyanosis, blue skin color, usually always low oxygenation of hemoglobin, so they have carbon monoxide poisoning or arsenic. So something is bonding to the hemoglobin or is doing something with the red blood cells, or if they're extremely anemic. So cyanosis, that word, if you see it, means they're blue skin color. You can look at their lips, their skin. It has a tinge to it. Paler is blanching or pale color. So they're extremely white. And you'll in years to come or whatever, if you're in healthcare now, you look at someone and go, they don't look right. All right, anemic, low blood pressure, maybe from fear or anger. Some you're white, looks like you saw a ghost. Or if they come in and they're just really, really pale, they could be malnourished, they could have anemia, low blood pressure, so we're not perfusing the tissues with blood. All right, erythema, ERY, erythrocyte, usually means red. Right, fever, if they're elevated temperature, if their blood or they have hypertension, inflammation, allergic reaction, they're going to be very, very red. Jaundice, they have a yellow or greenish cast, can be a liver disorder. With bilirubin, unconjugated bilirubin, and the hepatobiliary tree can be a problem. So when you look at them, you'll see the color of their skin. So you'll see this if you're in healthcare, if you don't believe me, go to Walmart or Target or some, major store where you get a diverse population and look around. You'll see. So it could be someone with jaundice. So they could be very, very sick. They could have liver damage. They could have, you could look and they could have, tattoos head to toe. So we think, oh, maybe they have hepatitis. All right. Or, babies are born with jaundice. When they're born, a lot of their red blood cells first, and the liver has to take that hemoglobin from the red blood cells and the heme, the iron, and the globulin, and convert it. So, they're new. The babies are brand new. They really can't do this. So sometimes they have jaundice. But look at their skin. Depending on their ethnicity, if they have darker skin, really kind of look at the sclera of the white part, and you'll see it'll be yellow. It'll have a cast to it, and you'll pick this up as you get more into healthcare. So bruises they're really broken capillary beds. So it can be petechiae, you can call it ecchymosis. Really depends on the sign. Oh, here it is. Ecchymosis, hematomas result in clotting blood beneath the skin. As clot is broken down, color and bruises change. So they could be really, really red one day, brown, black. Depends. Black or brown necklace or bruises around the neck. Hyperpigmented dark areas in the axillary, so that's armpit. Around the neck may be signs of insulin resistance and elevated blood glucose levels. Talk a little bit about your hair. Once again, it's dead. All right. None located on the palm, soles, lips, nipples, or portion of the external genitalia. And then, depending on your age, you're going to realize that hair is going to be, as you get older, hair is going to be growing in places it never grew before. You're going to be losing it from places that was really, really prevalent. So it does change. All right. So warns of insects on the skin. I'm sure you've seen that. Something lands on you and you can sense it because it bends that hair follicle, and then we saw those erector pili muscles deep to that. So it's really an early warning sign. Hair on the head guards against physical trauma, holds in heat, protects heat loss, shield skin from sunlight. And once again, like the erector pili muscles will contract, your hair will stand up on end. So this can, when you're cold, it'll hold heat. If you look at a classic question like a cat when they're scared, their hair sensitive and it makes them look bigger, so they can ward off any other animals in the area. There's also called pilli, thus erector pilli muscle, produced by hair follicles, contains hard keratin, not soft like in the skin. Right. And then the shaft is the area that extends above the scalp where keratination is complete. That's the part we can see, the part we cut. Root is the area from the scalp where keratination is still going on. And just, depending on how much you want to get into this, just realize you're always going to lose hair, but as you're losing hair, you have other hair follicles replenishing that. So don't freak out if you lose hair here and there to be replenished, contingent upon your age, obviously. And this is just really showing the three parts of the hair shaft. So I'm going to point out these two words. I mentioned it last week in lab and lecture. We were talking about the adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla located above the kidneys. So remember, whenever you have a cortex, you always have a medulla. Right? When you have a medulla, you always have a cortex. And the cortex is usually external. Medulla is always deep. All right. Cuticle is the outer layer consisting of overlapping layers of single cells. So medulla and cortex are in the hair shaft, they're in the adrenal cortex, definitely in the brain. So hair pigments are made by monocytes and hair follicles. All right, very similar to melanin. So your hair color is really genetically constructed. And then gray and white hair results when melanin production decreases and air bubbles replace melanin in the shaft. All right. In women, generally gray earlier. Men, you'll see it on their temples, all right, above their ears. And temple means time. All right, so usually that means that's the first area to go gray. That's why they call temple means time. Right. Right. So there's that. There's your hair follicle. I am not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can read this over. I don't really think it's that important. There's a lot more things to learn. I've seen very few board questions on this. All right, but erector pilli muscles, they will ask you this. I've seen that before. All right. Yeah, so hair matrix, actively dividing area of the ball that produces hair cells. As matrix makes new cells, it pushes old ones upward. So hair loss is normal. It just means a new one's coming. Generally, if the restorative stage is keeping up with the degenerative stage anyway. So kind of know the different, like puberty, the axillary and pubic hair. Terminal is your coarse long hair. Vellus hair is the really fine hair. Of a certain person who likes to sniff hair, but we won't get into that. All right, alopecia, hair thinning in both sexes after age 40. All right, let's say a male is balding or a male pattern baldness, but if a woman starts to lose hair, it's very, very noticeable. It's called alopecia generally. All right. True or frank baldness, genetically determined and sex influence condition. Male pattern baldness caused by follicular response to DHT, dihydrotestosterone. All right, so generally, men that bald, or specifically men that bald early, they generally have more testosterone. It's just a thing. With that, I'm not going to get into nails. You can read through that if you want. I don't think I've ever asked a question on nails. Like I said, I'm not saying it's not important, but there's so much to do in the course. I will say though, this is true, and you'll figure this out when you're doing an exam on a patient or whatever. If you look at their skin, their nails, this is external. It'll give you an idea of what's going on with that patient. So nail appearance can help in diagnosing some diseases such as yellow tinge may indicate respiratory or thyroid gland disorder. Right, so it's going to have to do with oxygen. Oxygen or metabolism. Thickened yellow nails are due to fungal infection of the nail, and generally that usually cannot be treated superficially. All right, and fungal infections, remember, funguses are eukaryotic. So the medication that you or antibiotics should be taken, the azoles or some of these things, are very, very detrimental to the human cells because we're also eukaryotic. Koinkia is spoon nail and outward concave as opposed to convex of the nail may signal iron deficiencies. So generally, you'll definitely see this in the older population. All right. Oh, there it is. All right, Bowes lines. All right, so I've seen questions on this. Horizontal lines across nails may indicate severe illness. All right, and this is usually long-term illness. It's not going to be something acute because these bow lines, your nails, if you've ever lost a tone or a nail, all right, it can take, I think I lost a toenail once, and it literally took, I want to say 8 or 12 months for that thing to grow back. So this is usually going to be a long-term chronic thing. It's not something acute and brief. Right. So both horizontal lines across nails may indicate severe illness such as uncontrolled diabetes, heart attack, or cancer, chemotherapy. So just look for something. You don't have to know exactly what it means, but you should know normal from abnormal. So sudoriferous sweat glands. All right, sudoriferous. So this is really what causes body odor. You want to know all skin surfaces except nipples and parts of the external genitalia contain sweat glands. All right, there's echocrine or merocrine sweat glands. Apocrine sweat glands contain myoepithelial. Myo usually means muscle. Epithelial cells contract upon nervous system stimulation to force sweat into ducts. Okay, myoepithelial cells, right? So has anyone ever been super nervous on an interview or something, and all of a sudden you just start sweating for no apparent reason? That has to do with that's why. I'm not even touching the computer. So merocrine or eccrine glands, one on the palms, soles, and forehead. So if you see someone is hot or nervous or sweating, they're going to wipe their forehead, their palms are sweaty, their soles get sweaty. And it really helps in thermal regulation because you're going to have that evaporating that fluid, and with that, it's going to take some heat. Their secretion is sweat, 99% water, salts, vitamin C, antibodies, dermicide. Okay, so dermicide, side means to kill, micro-killing peptide. It kind of keeps that skin mantle non-hospitable for a lot of bacteria. And you've got some salt in there. So only Staph aureus and Staph epidermis can generally grow in that salt environment. And we have mannitol salt agar here, which is about 7% sodium chloride, and it inhibits the growth of most everything except for Staph aureus and Staph epidermis. And one will ferment the mannitol alcohol for food. Staph aureus will. It'll change that plate from pink to yellow. Staph epidermis will grow on the plate, but it won't from ferment the mannitol so it leaves the plate pink color. So it is inhibitory and selective. Selective for staph, inhibitory for everything else, and it's also differential because you can differentiate contingent upon what the color change or non-color change of the agar is. You can tell whether something is staph or it's just staph epidermis. But realize your sweat is there to help grip. If you're talking about your fingertips, if you were in a battle with someone, if you were sweaty, it'd be slippery. You wouldn't be able to hold on to you. It can help with thermal regulation, dispersal of body heat, especially if you dilate your capillaries underneath the skin. We want to get that heat off of your body and the environment to help you cool off. Right. Apocrine sweat glands confined to axillary and anal genital areas. And I remember I was joking last week. I was talking about these glands, and I said, if you're not really sure, the axillary or your groin area, so they tend to grow different bacteria. They help grow bacteria faster. They have a little bit of food for the bacteria. And I said, sometimes teenage boys smell like, barnyard goats. I was kind of kidding about that, but generally that's, because these are very, very active glands during puberty. Combined axillary and anogenital areas secrete viscous, milky, or yellow sweat that contains fatty substances and proteins, therefore food for that bacteria. Bacteria break it down, leading to body odor. Larger than apocrine sweat glands with duct emptying into the hair follicles, begin functioning at puberty. Functions unknown, but can act as a sexual scent gland. All right, so it can be a sweat gland, or can give off something called pheromones, or not to get whatever, but sometimes a small amount of quote unquote body odor can be an attraction. Let's just put it that way. All right, and then some people will shower, and when 30 to 45 minutes after the shower, they can start smelling again, and that has to do with the bacteria. Right? And they used to have tricyclane in soap, which is an antibacterial, used to kill that. It's illegal. Legal. It's not available in the U.S., but you can get it in Canada, and that's something. Aosept, I think, is the soap you can get in Canada, and you want to leave that on the armpits or the genital region for 10 minutes or so before you shower, and then you can shower. It'll actually kill all that bacteria, so you won't have that man funk or whatever you want to call it. Ceruminous glands are lining the external ear. They secrete cerumen or earwax, and this is really inhibitory for a lot of insects. It helps keep things from crawling in your ears while you're sleeping. Very gross. Mammillary glands secrete milk, and we kind of talked about that last week. They're apocrine glands, so they generally, we think they break off the apical end of that gland and contribute to the duct for the breast milk. So it's not a halocrine where the whole gland doesn't die. All right, sebaceous or oil glands are widely distributed except for the thick skin and palms and soles. Most develop from hair follicles, secrete into hair follicles. We want that sebaceous oil. We want it to keep your skin, your scalp supple. If you were talking about exposure to the sunlight or heat, or even in the winter, you wanted that little bit of an oil layer. Relatively inactive until puberty, stimulated by hormones, especially androgens. I remember being a teenager and literally having washed my hair every day. Just had to do it. It just got so greasy. Oily, I guess. Secrete sebum, oily holocrine secretion. So these are superficial. The gland literally erupts, and the entire content is secreted to coat the skin. Bacteriocide killing properties, softens hair and skin. So here it breaks down eccrine sweat glands, apocrine, sebaceous. All right. So eccrine are going to be sweat. Apocrine glands are going to secrete. We could say they. Some people will say they secrete hormones or enzymes, and they can be pheromones depending on what book you read. These are sebaceous glands. These are holocrine glands. Remember, these die. They excrete their contents extremely all the way. All right. Acne is a result of propionobacterium. It gets into the hair follicles, or gets into the sebaceous gland. Uses that oil and protein as food and causes acne. Whiteheads are blocked sebaceous glands. Secretion is oxidized, the whitehead becomes a blackhead. I luckily have never had those, or I have seen people use the Briori pour where they peel it off. I've seen that. And then seborrhea is cradle cap. Just when infants have an overactive glands. I think that should be just about it. All right. So skin is your first and foremost barrier. And once again, it's protection, body temperature regulation, helps you with cutaneous sensations if someone has a light touch or something lands on you, spider, a mosquito, whatever. Metabolic functions. It starts producing vitamin D1. All right, then it goes to your liver for vitamin D2. And then vitamin D3, calcitriol, is secreted in your kidney, and that's the only usable portion of vitamin D. Vitamin A through your skin, metabolic functions there. Blood reservoir, all right, excretion of waste. All right, and if you don't believe me, get near a smoker on the treadmill. Tell me that they're not excreting the nicotine, and you can smell it. Somebody who works a lot with petroleum products, you can smell it on their skin. So it's an organ of detoxification along with your kidneys. Skin is exposed to the microorganisms, abrasion, temperature extremes, and harmful chemicals. So we have provides a chemical, physical, and that literal biological barrier. So it keeps this chemicals from getting into the bloodstream, physical barrier against wear and tear, biological barrier for any microorganisms, hopefully. Chemical barrier, skin secretes many chemicals, sweat, sebum, all right, and then that defensin, that antimicrobial, which inhibits a lot of the organisms from growing on your skin. We have an acid mantle, or low pH of the skin, slows down bacterial multiplication. So bacteria, just like us, like to live usually, the ones that are going to be infective for us, right around 7.4. But if we lower that acidity, we talked about pH being important. If the pH isn't correct, it disrupts the enzymes, and with a lot of the metabolic functions don't operate. Melanin provides a chemical barrier against UV. All right, so we have physical barrier, and we said before we have the stratified squamous epithelial cells, which are flattened, layered for protection. They block water soluble substances, but lipid soluble can go right through, like dermal patches and some of these things can go right through the skin, through the biphospholipid layer into the cells. So lipid soluble substances, plant, organic solvents, acetone and paint thinner. So if you're going to use any of these chemicals, you want to wear gloves. All right, a lot of people in the chemical industry back in the day, 70s, 80s, or a lot of times people that worked at Roswell were handling a lot of these chemotherapeutic agents, or if they're handling any of these petroleum products, they go right to your skin, and then they're right there in the basement. Remember, they get right in your capillary bed, and they're in your bloodstream, and they're very, very nephrotoxic, or toxic to the kidneys and liver. Salts and heavy metals, lead or mercury. All right, so if you've seen The Wizard of Oz, a lot of that makeup was silver, mercury, lead-based for the Tin Man especially, the Cowardly Lion. And these people had a lot of liver and kidney damage from that makeup back in the day. It was absorbed right into the bloodstream. Nitroglycerin, all right, that's a vasodilator for people with angina or vascular problems with the myocardium. That dissolves under the tongue, all right, very quickly. All right, drug agents, enhancers that help carry other drugs across the skin. So this would be something we put in a dermal patch. All right, biological borders. All right, so biological biology. What's going on here? Epidermis contains those phagocytic cells. All right, and I said before they're specifically called dendritic cells, and they're going to be presenting the antigenic particle or the whatever's foreign through MHC2 markers to your immune system for recognition and hopefully antibody production to that. It's saying here DNA can absorb harmful UV radiation, burning it to harmless heat. Now, that's possible, but we really don't want the DNA exposed to UV radiation because that can start causing thymine dimers. So thymine, instead of bonding to adenine, it starts double bonding with itself, and that can screw up the molecular sequence of the nucleotides. Not a good idea. All right, inorganic solvents and heavy metals pass through the skin and into the blood. Multiple organ systems can be devastated, which can be lethal. Kidneys can shut down. Kidney damage. What's the drug they're treating COVID with? Not ivermectin and not polyclonal antibodies. Rifampin or whatever that you're treating these patients with. In case you don't know, it is a huge nephrotoxin. Causes major kidney damage, and they know it. My theory is, why aren't we treating it with ivermectin? Very well. I'm not going to get into it. All right, brain can be damaged, and we said before in class that these neurons in the central nervous system, theoretically, they can't regenerate. They can't go through mitotic division. Only the astroglia or glial cells can do that. The absorption of blood can result in anemia and neurological defects. Care must always be used when handling organic solvents and heavy metals. Right, you should never touch with your bare hands, and I said you want to wear gloves for that. Right. So regulating body temperature, sweat glands. All right, so we want to sweat. The air comes over and evaporates that, taking the body heat with it. All right, and just sort of know your if you're dehydrated, what's sensible, as you can see, insensible is what you can't see, like what you're breathing out, things like that. Like cold environment, cold external environment. We want to hold in the body heat, so we're going to actually shunt the blood from our subcutaneous capillary beds deep to our organs, right? Because if we have that capillary beds dilated, the skin surface, which is the largest surface, we're going to be dissipating or evaporating a lot of heat. So we really want to constrict that to a minimum. We still need some blood for to feed the skin cells, but we want to really shunt that blood deep to the organs. We want to make sure that the organs deep to the body are perfused, and we want to conserve that body heat. So some metabolic functions. Skin can synthesize vitamin D, needed for calcium absorption in the intestines. Remember, D1, skin, calcidiol, liver, calcitriol, T, D3, kidneys. And we need vitamin D to regulate calcium absorption in the intestines. And if any of you, when we get into this, I'll talk about the calcium regulation of blood. It's extremely fastidiously calculated. Too much or too little can cause severe muscle and nervous issues. So it's regulated extremely finitely. Chemicals from canocytes can disarm some carcinogens. Right. So some of these cancer-causing agents we can disarm, or we can neutralize them or alter them. But there's a limitation of matter. It really depends on the amount or concentration of the carcinogen. All right. Phagocytes can activate some hormones. They can convert cortisone into hydrocortisone. All right, anti-inflammatory. Right. Skin makes collagen ACE. ASE is an enzyme which aids in natural turnover of collagen to prevent wrinkles. So we want to break down that collagen and rebuild it so we don't get all wrinkled. Blood reservoir. Skin can hold up to 5% of the body's total blood volume. All right, not that much. Skin can secrete nitrogenous waste such as ammonia, urea, and uric acid. Skin is salty. If you don't believe me, get permission, but lick your neighbor or whatever, and you can tell me. All right, sweat can cause salt and water loss, excessive sweat, and so you want to rehydrate with water, maybe some Gatorade, but anyway. Skin cancer and burns. All right. So skin cancer and burns are there. Just know the rule of nines. All right. And most skin tumors are benign, but they can spread and metastasize if they get below the basal layer and into the bloodstream. They can metastasize. But usually there's going to be more superficial. So you can remove them. They never get deep into the bloodstream. So they're generally benign or non-invasive. So basal cell carcinoma would be deep, squamous cell carcinoma, usually more superficial, and melanoma, having to do with melanocytes. So these are squamous cell. These are usually more superficial. They're going to be scalp, ears, lower lip, hands. So that's a squamous cell. Melanoma. So what we learned in school, when you're doing your patient examination, ABC. So A is asymmetry, border, color, and diameter. So if anything changes shape, or if it's not symmetrical, right? Usually if you have a mole, it's usually round. It might be slightly elevated, but if it's changing color, if it's getting bigger, or if the border gets weird, that's usually indicative of something going on. You want to have that checked out. There's a melanoma. You can just tell by the dark color. So that you could mistake that for frostbite, right? Or I would. Tissue damage. They're going to break the body down. Just gives you a prognosis. First degree, second degree, and third degree. Now we call them partial or full thickness burns. So look through those. Know what those are, because they generally are going to ask you. You'll see a question on that. And think about burns, like the entire thickness burns. They look horrible. The only good thing about it, well, if you want to, the only positive thing about it is the patient doesn't feel anything because you actually start burning the nerve roots off. All right, skin grafting is usually or always necessary. All right. An autograph is always best, obviously. First degree, like a sunburn, okay. Maybe, yeah, like a light burn. You grab a pot for a half a second. Usually if it's water or steam, it's much more penetrating, so that usually causes second-degree burn. So this second-degree burn, they can call it partial thickness burn, full thickness burn. So the nomenclature is changed on that. I learned it as first and second and third degree, but some people will call it partial, full thickness, whatever. Visual lines just gives you an idea. Estimate the extent of severity of burns. All right. I'm going to end this here because this keeps threatening.